Hello, everyone. Madilynn here. I've got another fantastic author for you guys to check out today. We're going to be chatting about her book, life, and writing. So if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. And I'm going to bring out our author for today.
Hello.
Hello, Alice. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about your books.
Yeah, so I'm Alice Ivinya. I live in Bristol in England, and I've written quite a few books now. But the one that I've been talking about the most recently is my Feathers of Snow, Feathers of Blood, Kingdom of Feathers, the trilogy, The Kingdom of Birds and Beasts, because it's recently completed. And it's a fairy tale retelling of the Grimm's fairy tale, The Goose Girl. And I've written a few other fairy tale retellings as well, and a few young adult fantasy books.
I love fairy tale retellings. I actually, reading the bit of information you sent me over, that totally caught my eye. So where did you find, have you always found yourself drawn to that story, or was it just something that inspired you to to go with your idea? How did this book come about?
Yeah, it's funny because it's not the most well-known fairy tale, but I really loved it as a child. So I had a little kids version with illustrated version of the Goose Girl growing up. And I don't know why it stuck in my head so much. I think it's partly because it's the protagonist is really nice and gentle, but there's some really shockingly dark stuff in it, and it definitely included that in my little kids book of it, such as talking horse heads that are hung up above gates, and the baddie who dies at the end by being dragged through the streets in a barrel of nails. So really dark stuff. So I think that's partly what made it stick into my head. And then I read Shannon Hale's retelling, which is just called The Goose Girl, which is just beautiful. Really, really beautiful. It's in quite a different style than mine, but it just really captures the goodness of the main character when she's confronted with evil, and I really liked that. But then I decided to do my own version, which is it's a bit darker. It's a bit more. It's got a lot more action in it. But it was absolutely great fun to write, and it's just such a good fairy tale. There's so much drama going on, so many things that you can expand on. It's just fantastic, The Goose Girl.
I always love to hear it when authors say it was fun to write, because there's not many that say that. And you're really invested in enjoying what you do when you say it's fun. And that's the best job to have, if you ask me.
Feathers of Snow was one of the most fun books ever written. I mean, a lot of my books were very fun to write. Some of them were a bit more of a slog, but so much drama. I think that's the fun thing about it. It's just endless drama.
Hey, that keeps it interesting and keeps the readers tied in. So, And did you find yourself having to do much research when you started writing this?
Not for this one. I think because it wasn't at all linked to this world. That meant there was less research than some of my other ones. Say I've done a Pied Piper retelling, which involved quite a lot of research. Whereas this one, there were a little bit of research sometimes about its medieval dress and the functions of things, and how you'd warm your bed if it was freezing cold, and silly things like that, how you might warm a drink or keep a drink warm. Very little minor details were researched for this one, but a lot of it was just trying to figure out. I think because there's a talking horse in The Goose Girl, that sort of dictated a lot of the story, because I had to create a world, even though in the original fairy tale there's just a talking horse and no one cares and they never explain it. But I wanted a world that made sense within itself. So a lot of the world building was all about how to have a world where a talking horse that could only talk to one or two people could be realistic. And so a lot of my thought processes, not so much into research, but just trying to work out quite a complex world where everything fit together and made sense. But I suppose the thing I researched the most actually was my main character has PTSD. So actually doing quite a lot of research into that, but also how just the psychology of it, sort of the things that can help you get better, your coping strategies, that sort of thing, were the things I researched the most, actually, now I think about it.
That's fascinating that you've tied that in there. Do you feel like like some of the stuff you researched for helping with that comes across in your story?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't recommend it as like actual therapy, and she has quite an extreme adventure. But some of the ideas and just I just wanted to make it authentic. I didn't want to just stick a plaster over her as her character arc grew. I wanted to actually make her better, as in like I wanted her improvements to be into knowing who she was and how she could deal with things. I wanted them to be quite authentic. So though she's never cured really of her PTSD, I've tried to give her coping mechanisms that allowed her to for it to not define her by the end of the book.
That is fascinating. Do you have anything in life that maybe influenced your decision to put that in there?
Um, I think it was, so originally, when the very first draft of The Goose Girl, she didn't have PTSD. She just was slightly traumatized by her upbringing. And then my editor, I've got an amazing developmental editor called Claire Staley. She just said, this girl has been basically bullied and abused by her mistress her whole life, like her really psychotic, sadistic mistress. There's no way she's not going to be traumatized by that. And I think that's what gave me the idea of actually, if this is going to be real, my main character with her backstory is going to be really, really psychologically damaged in many ways. And that's why, and then basically researching that and deciding actually that fit her as a character, and that's part of her journey, is not giving in to her past, but being able to overcome it to have a better future.
Wow.
Basically, yeah.
How long did it take you to create this series from start to finish?
It's a hard question because I wrote 2 other books in the middle. But each book took me about 6 to 8 weeks to write initially, and then they all spent about 4 to 6 weeks with a developmental editor, then about 3 or 4 weeks my own editing, and then they went to beta readers for a few weeks, and then they went to my line editor, who would just sort of do the final proofread. So they each took about 3 months each. But I did have a little break in the middle to finish my a different duology.
That's pretty quick, though, for 3 months to finish it from start to finish with each book. That's impressive.
It was a challenge, especially the last one.
Yeah,
that's so big.
How did you manage that with family and everything like going on?
Yeah, it's I'm not really sure sometimes when I think back of it. So I work part-time as a vet. I'm a charity vet. And I've also got a 3.5-year-old son who hasn't napped in the day for a very, 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 very long time. So no help on that front. So I normally write for an hour before bed, 3 or 4 days a week. And it's actually, when you're in the routine of it, it's amazing how much you can achieve just with an hour or so of writing. And I think because 2 days a week I do childcare, just childcare, you can mull on ideas when you're doing and just looking after your child, because even though you want to be there for them and playing with them and fully engaged, you've still got space in your brain to be ticking over ideas and plotting things. So I think that helps speed me up as well, just having that brain space for creativity.
That is awesome. And you're like a super mom for real, getting all of that done with taking care of a child. Because I'm a mom myself, and I struggle to find the time to write. And half the time it's like at night, I'm like sitting at my computer, like, okay, we're going to try to write 1,000 words. We can do this. And I'll find myself dozing off. I'm like, this is
Oh dear.
Have you found yourself in that situation? Like, how do you keep yourself awake when you sit down to write?
I tend not to doze off. I tend to procrastinate a bit. So I'll flip a bit too many times onto Facebook or get a bit bogged down researching something that's not particularly relevant, or just zoning out. Like sometimes I just zone out. But I think for me, I just try and be gentle with myself. Like I've got this hour, I'll write what I'll write, try and concentrate. If my brain's not there, as long as I've got some words down on the page, fine.
Yeah, that is a good way to go. You have to be, because it's hard, like staying consistent. But I like the routine you've got set up. And have you been pretty consistent with that routine since you started writing? Or did you have to find like what worked best with you?
Yeah, so it's been, I mean, COVID made it a little bit different. I had a lot more time when we were in lockdown, because we had quite a lot of very strict lockdowns for a very long time in England. And that actually made it a bit easier in the evenings. But since then, I think it's hard because I do also want to see people. I've got other commitments and do more things in the evenings than I was. But I try and have that set time. And I also look ahead and think, oh, when's the busy time? Because the busiest times are normally between my developmental editor and my beta readers, when I have to completely edit my draft, normally 2 or 3 times, something that's fairly polished, because I like to send it to my beta readers almost done. And so for those 2 or 3 weeks, I'll plan them ahead and try and get them a bit more free, to really, and then I have the pressure, and I work best under pressure really, because otherwise I just mess around. So the pressure helps me to actually knuckle down and write. Yeah.
That's good. I seem to do okay under pressure too, but since as an indie author, I don't know, if I don't set myself deadlines, everything just kind of, it's like, hey, we're just going to float over here. We'll get done eventually. But I also have the habit of like, I tend to pile on and try to do more than I can at one time. So many different story ideas kind of floating around in my head. It's just like, okay, I've got to focus on one for a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm awful at that. I definitely have no tips on that front, because I'm always awful at writing more than one book or getting distracted.
Oh my gosh, yes. And like, I'm terrible when it comes to editing, because I will write the story, but I hate going back and editing. I know I absolutely have to do it before I send it to an actual editor, but like it's procrastination kicks in really bad there. And I'm like, let's just go work on this story idea. Just put it back over there. Do you have a way of organizing your ideas to keep like working on one thing at a time?
Yeah, I mean, I've done different tactics in the past. I think my problem is that if I get a scene really vividly, it's often the emotion behind the scene that is the thing that's really caught me. And that's just more than like a sequence of events. So for me if I'm feeling that emotion strongly, I just know I have to write it down, because if I just write myself like 2 or 3 sentences conveying what happens, 6 months later, when it's actually time for me to write the story, I'm just like, oh, those things happen, and it's, I've lost that emotion, that driving force behind it, because I'm not feeling it anymore. So I've learned that actually I just write that scene, and I will miss out details I don't know, but I'll write the bit that has the punch behind it, and then I'll just put it in a Google Doc somewhere and come back to it another stage. So that is sort of quite distracting. But I think I realised I need to do that. But also, once I know that scene is written and out the way, I can then just forget about it, because it's there and it's safe, and I'm not having to think about it. And then if I've because editing is the hard slog, I've got my deadlines, because I've generally booked my line editor in advance, because otherwise she wouldn't be free. So I know I have to finish it by then. So I just have to go, and I've got no other choice. And that just keeps me going, really, keeps me moving forward. That pressure.
That's a really good idea, though, to book and like set that deadline. Like, I'm going to have it to you at this date. Like, hold me accountable, brain, for doing this. I like that. I might need to adopt that habit myself. So
it's dangerous as well, because sometimes I'm just like, it's not going to be ready and I'm rushing it. But it does, you can always put your deadline back afterwards if they say, oh no, this is rubbish. So that's one take from it.
How do you handle that when they tell you that? Like, when you get that back, like, oh, this is rubbish, you need to fix this, this, and this. Like, do you have this overwhelming sense of like, holy crap, it's crap? Or like, do you go into it head first, like, I'm going to fix this? Like, what is your feeling toward that?
I like people to be honest with me. And in general, I'm quite good at judging. So if it is rubbish, I kind of know it's rubbish already, and I just need someone to confirm that it's rubbish. So it doesn't really hurt my feelings. It's normally the developmental editing stage where someone will tell me it's rubbish. My developmental editor, and she's always very like nice about it. She's like, this bit's good, but this bit could use a lot more work. And sometimes I send it to her twice. Like my last book in the series, Kingdom of Feathers, I had to send to her twice because the first time I was basically missing a third of the story because I just got myself a bit stuck, so skipped a bit, and I was like, how do I fill in the middle bit? Do you have any ideas? But I think I've made my peace with the fact that some of my books are going to be better than others, and that's okay. They're not all going to be perfect, or none of them are ever going to be completely perfect, but some will suit other readers more than others. And I think that's what surprised me, is that some books that I felt are less strong are some other people's favorites. And that's the funny thing. But if my book's rubbish, I want people to tell me before it's published, and then I can sort it out, and I'm perfectly happy with that. I'm not easily offended. I just want help.
Yes, and that honest feedback. I always get frustrated when people are like, oh no, this is great, and you're like, no, you did not. Either you didn't read it, or you're afraid of hurting my feelings. Like, this is not, no. So, and I never will forget my first book. I rushed things, and I asked my mom to read it, and she did. And she's like, oh, this is great. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. And I was just like, Mom, why didn't you tell me like all of this was like right here? Like, oh, what's your first book I was giving you? I was like, no, that is not how the world works these days. So I was just like, okay, never again. So, but with your story, you said you write a lot of the scenes when you have the emotions. Going back and reading through that, do you feel those same emotions come through when you hit those scenes?
Yeah, so I think that's the thing, is that if I've written it feeling those emotions, then when I read them back, I can see the emotion, I can feel the emotions, and they pack their punch. And sometimes when I actually write them into the story, they can seem a little bit melodramatic. But it's much easier, I think, to tone down emotions than it is to recreate them when you can't remember what you're trying to create. So a lot of the strongest, more emotive scenes, I'll tend to have written them in advance and then fit them all in afterwards when I'm actually writing the book, and then dumb them down so they're not quite so dramatic.
I love it. That's fantastic. Do you find any inspiration from music when you're writing? Do you have any music playing and it kind of inspires you?
Yeah, often I write in silence. I find that's how I can hear my thoughts the best. Sometimes I listen to dramatic movie soundtracks like Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, all the classic Disneys, and then songs like Carl Jenkins' Adi Armas, so ones which not actually got real words but are very dramatic, and they can sometimes really help me sort of get in the mood. But if I'm not too careful, I get like so swept up in the music, and then and it's not, and then I'm like starting to go just massively over the top in my writing. It's just a normal scene and I'm suddenly making it all dramatic, and I'm like, no, I need to tone it down. It's not quite the right time for that.
But it's truly amazing how that can affect your writing. I always found that it's crazy because certain songs, I have a lot of fight scenes in my stories, and I'm like, okay, I need to change. Like, I will go through my music, like I need a fight song of some sort. And it's crazy, and it just when you get the right music, it just amps everything up so much more. And like you said, it's easier to tone it down than to just not to make it bigger. So write it as you feel it.
There's definitely been some times where I've written a scene and thought, actually, no, this isn't enough. This is too dull, and then I'll listen to a song separately to get myself in the mood, and then I'll go back and write it and be like, actually, no, that emotion that the song gave me, that's the emotion that I need to put in here. And I found that's helped sometimes. Or watching a similar scene on TV or in a movie or in a book or something, like, no, they caught that emotion, and that's the emotion that I want to in my writing.
So your main character, her name is, I'm trying to find my notes. Okay, tell me her name again. Your main character, Brianna. Okay, that's what I was thinking, but I was like, I'm not sure. Too many book stuff. It doesn't help that I've been reading like crazy too. So for her, did you find yourself putting a little bit of you in her?
Yeah, it's a little bit of she's very different from me as well, but there's definitely some of my traits in which my husband has pointed at out on a few occasions, especially when she's purposely bugging someone else. He's like, you do that all the time. I think the funny thing is that sometimes, so Brianna does make a lot of, sometimes some quite stupid decisions. But some of the decisions she makes are ones that I probably would have made in her shoes. And then I just find it hilarious when I read some of the reviews and be like, why did she do that? So stupid. Like, how could she possibly do that? And I'm like, I should definitely not be a fantasy queen because I would mess up the kingdom really quickly because I can be a bit impulsive. Brianna's very impulsive. So it's like, this is a good warning that maybe I'm not cut out for politics.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's your world, so
yeah.
And it's cool that you tied that in there because I feel like that makes her more realistic. So, did you find yourself putting like any more inspiration into her from others around you, or maybe from movies or other books you read?
I think she's just a real mix. I think of. I always find it really hard to see where I've got my characters from because a lot of the time they just feel like they're there in my head already. And I think actually a lot of her characteristics are defined by who she is and her past and her relationships with people. I think underneath it all, she's she's a bubbly, impulsive person, but that has been really restricted and dumbed down by her difficulty of her childhood and through bullying and some traumatic experience she's had. So I think, I think she probably gets more like me as she goes on through the books, but she's a little bit, she's a bit more impulsive than me at the last book. She makes a few more bad decisions than I'd like to think I would have made in her place. But I don't know where the rest of her comes from. She just is the way she is.
That's awesome. It's crazy how these characters develop in our heads and then we put them on the paper and it's just like, where did this come from? Like, who are you? You're not me, but you're some of me and some of way out there in left field kind of stuff. Like, what?
The way they're just like our children, aren't they? They're like part you and part you're like, I have no idea where that other part came from because that's not me at all.
Yes. Oh man, that's so true with that. Because I'm like, oh no, that's my sister or that's my brother coming out, and my son, I'm like, nope, not me. Nope, that's you. That's my hubby. Nope. But the stuff he gets around, I'm like, nah. Do you feel like Brianna took over when you were creating the story and was like, this is what I want it to be like when you were writing?
Yeah, I think especially in the last book, she in many ways, sort of her reactions to things did change the plot a little bit, and the plot did sort of flow around her character and her trying to come into her own, but not always hitting the mark. And her relationship with Jian, who's the love interest, and the fact that he's just a cool cucumber, and doesn't get easily. He thinks through all his decisions very, very hard, and sort of like that. The juxtaposition of those two characters did change. Well, I had to write almost around that rather than fit them into the plot a bit at the end.
That is awesome because I like that. They like it almost like it matches up good because they're like almost opposites. But that is awesome.
They definitely need each other.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a good, like almost like a good character mashup, especially because they're like worlds kind of start to revolve around each other as the story progresses, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask how it ends because like we want readers to check it out and find out for themselves. But like I have ideas, so I'll have to read and find out for myself. So something I always bring up with talking with authors, and it's something very important to me, is self-care. Do you have a method or routine of self-care that you follow?
I think it's something that I've got a little bit better at since I've become a mum. Just because if you don't plan time for yourself, it never, ever, ever happens.
So true. So true.
We have to be quite active with it. And I think as well, like my son was quite a hardcore baby. He was poorly for a lot of the first few months of his life. He cried all the time. He never slept. And I think part of me is like, never again. I'm going to like never be that intensely like caught up in something like that again. Yeah, I think I suppose sometimes I just try and be gentle with myself in the fact that with something creative, you can't always just force it out. And sometimes you just have to give yourself space and grace and let yourself watch a bit of TV or read a really good book. I think that's a lot of it, really. I think I do well with being busy. Yes. But I just have to be careful not to be too busy. And I definitely set better boundaries now than I used to, mostly with actually restricting the amount of people who come over for dinner in a week and the amount of people who I meet up with, just trying to keep it a bit more manageable.
That makes sense. And your entire world changes when you become a mom, because I too started like focusing more on like me time and self-care after my son arrived, because I didn't realize how important it was and how much I needed that. And you mentioned being gentle on yourself. Is that something you had to learn to do too?
Yeah, I think I'm quite driven, and I, especially at school and at uni, I was very academically driven, and I had to be really to get my veterinary degree, because it's very competitive. So I think in that sense, I was used to pushing myself as hard as I can go, all the way to my limits. And often in my job as well, just to get through the day, sometimes I have to push myself all the way to my limits to make sure that I can get, save everything that needs to be saved, see all the animals that need to be seen, do everything that needs to be done. So I think I've been very used to pushing myself right up to my limit all the way through my life. And I think I'm just in the last sort of 3-4 years learning to actually step back a bit and see that there are times when it's okay to push yourself, but a lot of the time it's better to more focus on where you are and what you're doing and enjoying it.
It's good. Yes. And another question I always ask is, as an author, what defines success for you in your author portion of your career?
Oh, it's such a hard question. I think every year I like to be doing a little bit better than the year I was before. It'd be wonderful if one day I had a stable financial income from my books. And it is every few months it's better than it was before. But I think the biggest thing that defines success for me is having readers who either love my books or find that my books have helped them in some way, either as a distraction through hard times or challenge them to do something for themselves that's a good thing, or just resonated with them. And I think I would write for free if I knew that it was in some way helping people. And they're always the reviews that mean the most to me, and they're the reviews that keep me going much more than income or anything like that.
I have to agree, because it just does something to your entire being when you get those and you read that hey, it inspired me to do this or something along those lines. I agree. This is beautiful. So, and also, if you could tell your readers something unique about yourself, what would you tell them? Something they may not know.
Something unique. Oh, I've got a few things. I've got a lot of English and Scottish royalty in my family tree. I've got King Robert the Bruce, which is the one from William Wallace. I've got Edward II. I've got a queen. Which queen have I got? One of the Queen Anne's, I think. I don't know, but that's a very random fact. Other random facts is I play the harp.
Cool.
Many years, but I can play a little bit of the harp. I was played at school. And I hate coffee.
That hurts my heart because I'm a coffee drinker, but I also saw your thing. It was tea. It's very much tea, but I do drink tea. So, but I get that coffee is definitely not for everyone. It was something, I feel like you almost have to, it's like an acquired taste for coffee.
Yeah. So. Anything that's bitter, I don't like. It's coffee, dark chocolate, beer, anything like that. Anything that's bitter is gross to me. Just can't take it.
It's I'm definitely an acquired taste. So, and then you could also add like a ton of creamer and it's not as bad. So, but all right, go ahead and tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, so all my books are published on Amazon. Most of them are exclusive to Amazon, and most of them are on Kindle Unlimited. So if you've got Kindle Unlimited, you can borrow my books for free. And I've got a website, alicegent.com. Gent is my maiden name. I know it's a bit complicated, but that is my website. And you can also find me on Facebook, especially in my Facebook group, Alice Ivinya Fantasy Gossip. You can buy. I've got an array of books that I published in the middle.
Here's a cool little graphic with them too for you guys watching on YouTube. You can check some of those out here. They're really cool, great covers. But yeah, so Alice, thank you so much for hanging out with me on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It's been really nice to meet you.
Yes.